You. So a very good evening, namaste and assalamu alaikum to all who have joined us today. My name is Dr. Amina Hussain and I'm glad to be your host for today's program. Now, this discussion is in continuance with our series on identity that Umran Academic Research Association has organized with Umran Women's Magazine. Now, previously in our last discussion, we had a talk on the novel of Tahmima Anam and poetry of Chandrika Narayan Mohan, where we deliberated on issues of identity, especially in diaspora. Now, for today and tomorrow especially, we have discussion planned for you on Kamila Shamsie, the famous novelist from Pakistan, and Dalit resistance in Malapalli. Now, for today, our speaker is Fatima M. She's from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. Dr. Fatima M. has recently received her PhD from the Center for English Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Texas at Austin, USA in 2017 and 18. She was also a visiting PhD scholar at the University of Tübingen, Germany in 2017. She will be speaking on today, identity, religion, and cosmopolitan spirit, reading the fiction of Kamila Shamsie. Now, the session will be moderated by Professor Miriam Cook from the Duke University, USA. Now, Professor Cook needs no introduction. We all know she's a Braxton Craven Professor of Arab Cultures at Duke University. She's also the board of advisor at Umran, and it is a privilege to have her at Research Association and Umran's Women's Magazine. Her research concerns Middle Eastern and the Arab world studies. She focuses on modern Arabic literature and critical reassessment of women's role in public sphere. Now, before we proceed with our planned lecture, I would like to introduce Umran Academic Research Association to our audience who has just joined in. Now, we know our Umran Academic Research Association is an academic project of the Umran Green Perspective Foundation. It is founded by Rajiv Kumar and it is inspired by Professor Bruce B. Lawrence's teaching of cosmopolitan spirit, which is based on the theory of Barzakh logic. And Umran's Green Outlook, which aims at a sustainable approach and which values and respects the environment along with the Bohas philosophy. Now, a bit about Barzakh. It is a Quranic word and it basically means a divider or a barrier. And Professor Bruce has reinvented the word as a civilizational life force in his theory. He considers Barzakh as a very crucial concept, in connecting civilization, people, ethnicities, religion, where people get connected without losing their distinct identity, and it's especially crucial in the Anthropocene age. He defines Barzakh as a thin line or an interspace that connects the two realms, without diluting or dominating the other. So here all binaries get dissolved, whether of human or nature or evil, good or Hindu, Muslims or Jews, Christian or man, women. So it's basically, it aligns everything to spiritually achieve the pinnacle of human existence and civilization. And that is what Umran achieves, alongside. So without wasting much time, I would just like to, proceed. We are in the holy month of Ramadan. So from the entire Umran team, we wish this, Ramadan bring us peace, health, love, compassion, and prosperity in our lives and around the world. So Ramadan Mubarak to everyone who all are connected across, different time zones. Now, I would just like to ask everyone here to keep their microphones muted during the lecture. And if there is any question, please keep it alive till the end of the session. And you will get an opportunity. You can do it by either raising your virtual hand or typing the question in the chat box. Now, I invite Professor Miriam Cooks to please begin the discussion on Kamila Shamsie today. Ma'am, your microphone is muted. We cannot hear you. If you can, ma'am, yes.
Thank you. I thought that Fatima was going to speak and then I would respond to her talk.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. But if you would like to say something, you are more than welcome to say that.
No, go ahead.
All
It's
right.
about
So I
you.
think we should, yes. So
Okay.
invite Fatima to please begin.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Amina, for that really interesting introduction, and to Rajiv, and many thanks to everyone who is here with me today. I'm really honored to be a speaker today after much deliberation and much thought. Dr. Amina has already told you about my topic. So my exact title is Cosmopolitanism and Intersection of Old and New Spaces in Kamila Shamsie's Burnt Shadows. But before I begin, I want to read a passage, and then I want to broadcast a picture, not a picture exactly, but a handmade diagram, and then I will proceed with my presentation. So I will read now. Once he is in the cell, they unshackle him and instruct him to a trip. He takes off his grey winter coat with brisk efficiency, and then, as they watch, arms folded, his movement slow, fear turning clumsy on belt buckle, shirt buttons, they wait until he is completely naked before they gather up his clothes and leave. When he is dressed again, he suspects he will be wearing an orange jumpsuit. The cold gleam of the steel bench makes his body shrivel. As long as it's possible, he will stand. How did it come to this? He wondered. So give me a moment. I want to share a photo here, which I have made myself. Uh, yeah. Yeah. Is this visible? Is my screen visible? Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. So what I have written here, I have made a small pictorial representation here, where if you zoom it, you can see I have written that what we know from this passage, that there are some tangible things which we can talk about a person. Of course, he's a male, because she says that once he's in the cell. So from this pronoun, we know that he's a male. But apart from that, we know that there is a gray winter coat, arms are folded. Of course, there is a body, and then the body is completely naked. And when the person hopes to be dressed again, he thinks there is an orange jumpsuit, or the anticipation of an orange jumpsuit. Of course, there is torture, steel bench. So these are the things we know. But what we don't know: color, nationality, religion, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. Okay, yeah. So the passage above reveals captivity, torture, and inhumanity of individuals in the name of nationalism, and draconian laws that often oppress those who already occupy the fringe position. The conflict described above also surpasses any differences of nation, nationality, ethnicity, or race, and yet these very differences very often alienate most humans from basic humanity and bind them to the chain of trauma and displacement. Kamila Shamsie, who has dealt with ethnic conflicts in many of her novels, unleashes the brutality of painful migrations, imposed identities, territorial divides, and strategic exclusion and othering in her novel Burnt Shadows. So the passage above, the location of that place, which I read in the passage, it's the detention camp in Cuba. The novel spans a wide temporal and spatial narrative. It begins with the story of tyrannical detentions by America in Cuba, and soon moves to Japan and goes on to encompass a wide history of colonial India, the partition of India in 1947, political instability in Karachi, Pakistan, the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, the formation of Taliban, the 9/11 Twin Tower attack in America and its aftermath, the war in Afghanistan, and the ultimate nothingness and futility of everything in a small apartment in New York. So the framework for this analysis I have chosen Cosmopolitanism, which offers a perspective beyond the binary opposition of Hindus versus Muslims, India versus Pakistan, and allows us to reinterpret history surrounding the partition differently. In this context, the work of Shamsie, who herself has a very hybrid identity, a British Pakistani author, a Shia Muslim in Pakistan, her novel is a pertinent work given the scope of post-colonial hybridity, ethnic conflict, and cosmopolitanism. Burnt Shadows explores the elements of cosmopolitanism vis-a-vis the epochal events of the world, such as the partition of India, the bombing in Japan, Russian occupation in Afghanistan, 9/11, and all the wars after that. A common ground behind these attempts of invasions, mass killings, colonizations is a desperate attempt to homogenize societies and cultures by polarizing them, and always viewing them in binary oppositions, such as us versus other. Cosmopolitanism can broadly be defined as a willingness to interact with the potential other by embracing cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and racism and race differences, to accept differences without inculcating a sense of exclusion or othering. This is not a recent concept. The ideals of cosmopolitanism go way back in history. Immanuel Kant, one of the foremost proponents of cosmopolitanism, defines it as, I quote, the matrix within which all the original capacities of the human race may develop. So it sort of gives that framework of inclusion. Arjun Appadurai, another contemporary critic who talks about cosmopolitanism, he gives a more contemporary definition, and which is useful for third world countries, when he speaks of the idea of cosmopolitanism from below, from the vantage point of third world spaces like India. He calls this kind of cosmopolitanism, I quote, the urge to expand one's current horizons of self and cultural identity, and a wish to connect with a wider world in the name of values, which in principle could belong to anyone and apply in any circumstance, unquote. This form of cosmopolitanism, which he alternatively calls vernacular cosmopolitanism, also resists the boundaries of class, neighborhood, mother tongue, but it does so without an abstract valuation of the idea of humanity or of the world as a generally known or knowable place. Thus, the values of recognition, inclusion, and hospitality as part of the common human universe, therefore, remain at the heart of this cosmopolitan ideal. Now we come to the novel, specifically to the novel. In Burnt Shadows, Hiroko Tanaka, initially a school teacher, ends up working in a munitions factory. Her father, an artist, is labeled a traitor for speaking against the emperor and the tyrannical regime of kamikaze militarism in Japan. The novel thus begins with the Second World War as its backdrop and soon explores the perils of going against dictatorship. Hiroko falls in love with Konrad Weiss, a German, who is in Japan to avoid witnessing the tyrannical Nazi regime in his country. But Konrad is killed when America bombs Nagasaki, and the tragedy gives Hiroko a permanent mark on her back and also a lifelong exile. At the end of World War II, Germany, Japan, and America represent the beginning of a new world order that would establish rigid norms of nation and nationalism, and also the privilege and hierarchy of identities based on these. And some scars, just like the one on Hiroko's back, they remain forever. Now, after Konrad dies, Hiroko travels to colonial India, only to witness yet another divide and displacement in the other side of the world. India is under the British rule and on the brink of partition. Hiroko stays with Konrad's stepsister Ilse and her husband, James Burton. It is at their place that she is romantically drawn to Sajjad Ali Ashraf, their employee, who agrees to teach her Urdu. Given his position and identity as an Indian Muslim, Sajjad is immediately dismissed as a potential predator. But what actually unites both Hiroko and Sajjad is their common experience of geographical and psychological displacements that transform the meaning of home for both of them into perpetual longing for home. After the partition of India, Sajjad is forced to move to Karachi, and Delhi is forever lost to him, just like Nagasaki is lost to Hiroko. And now in Karachi, she finds the Hindu-Muslim biases and the politics and the divisive politics that further fuse this divide. She finds all this not only baseless, but also inhumane, unjust, and unethical, because she is a critical outsider here, despite living in Karachi for so long. After beginning a new life in Karachi, both Sajjad and Hiroko remain in exile forever in their own ways, with Hiroko knowing and always contemplating about going beyond the constructed notions about nation and home. She occupies the position of a critical insider and also a critical outsider, either way realizing the narrowed perspectives on self and the other as the root cause of all biases. The staunch anti-West and anti-Hindu bias in Pakistan puts her at unease, since her foreign identity fuels suspicions about her cultural and religious beliefs. Hiroko believes that all cultures emerge from one common premise of basic humanity, and she finds the persistent tension even after independence even more problematic. Hiroko thus becomes the center of fluidity that Shamsie intends to engage with in the novel. Her criticism of rigid national boundaries and cultures makes the idea of cosmopolitanism entangled with the concept of nativity, and brings out the futility of a uniform platform or the tendency for this uniformity in which all human beings are labeled and divided into compartments. Her desire to expand the normativity of what home means is seen in terms of her foreignness and also her groundedness, her nativity in a land where she is not born. This suspicion had also fueled the political divide in India that ultimately made the two-nation theory feasible. The abrupt shift from colonial Delhi to the birth of Pakistan and Karachi that Shamsie depicts is surreal even as fiction. But it was a lived reality that changed the course of history and the lives of millions of people. Decades later, the hostility between these two countries only confirms the bias and hatred interspersed with ignorance that still governs their politics. Another cosmopolitan element that Shamsie deals with in the novel is the acceptance of strange places as home and a sincere attempt to feel at home in these strange places. Strange in quote, of course. Hiroko tries to feel at home in Karachi, and she for many years calls that place her home, despite the hostility she faces there. Home in that sense becomes an abstract idea to her. It becomes a constant struggle within herself and with the outside world to feel at home or even call Karachi her home. Not only Hiroko, but her only son Raza also faces discrimination, first as a child of mixed parents and later as an ethnic other. Since his features resemble the much loathed Hazara community in Pakistan and Afghanistan, his hatred for self soon transforms him to an extent that he ends up becoming part of a terrorist group. This further traumatizes Hiroko, for she could not fathom the extent to which her son's identity has damaged him. His psychological displacement is not completely alien to her, but she is not able to measure the extent of it. The mohalla or the neighborhood in Karachi where he lives, where he has lived all his life, has always been a strange place to him. Because of its homogeneous population, Hiroko and her son could never assimilate there. Raza's false confession of being a Hazara gives him some sense of grounding and self-worth, that he's actually Pakistani, even if a Hazara and not born to a Japanese mother. This is a desperate attempt to assimilate in the only society he has ever known. But these lies turn him against the West, which is often seen as a threat to the ideals and values of the East. All of them, in one way or other, live in exile. The home is forever lost to them, and the place they now inhabit is repulsive as well. So now we come to the last part where we, so homogeneous versus cosmopolitan ideals or cosmopolitanism. So if we revisit the 1947 partition from today's perspective, and through Shamsie's novel, it is not very difficult to understand that it was based on a false assumption that India and Pakistan can sustain themselves only by religious homogenization. The ideals of cosmopolitanism were as alien in the entire process as much as the hatred for the other was prevalent. Despite having lived together in peace for centuries, the Hindu and Muslim communities were manipulated by the colonizers into thinking that they could not live together. However, the homogenization failed miserably, and both nations still reel under the destructive politics of othering. The cosmopolitan ideal as a threat to homogenization is what One Shadows depicts, with an emphasis on the destructive consequences of all such attempts. The partition was a failure in the modern history of the Indian subcontinent. The birth of Bangladesh is a living example of this failure, alongside the communal and ethnic conflicts that these two countries still face time and again. The resistance against vernacular cosmopolitanism, as Appadurai says, is very much a reality, even as much as it was during the time of partition. Moreover, this desperate othering has led to further destruction as Shamsie depicts. Homogenizing societies for economic gains have also failed miserably, whether it is the partition of India, Russian invasion of Afghanistan, 9/11 attack and its aftermath that tore Afghanistan apart. The underlying inability to see beyond us and other remains constant. The order of the old world is replicated in the new world, creating more patterns of self and the potential threat that is other. This is in that way to this and one of the most convincing novels by Shamsie, in which not only she emphasizes on the fluidity of identities, but also exposes the trauma of imposed identities. Now, I want to broadcast one more picture, just a sec. Yeah, this one. So this sort of explains the geographical, territorial, and also psychological migrations that are depicted in the novel. So it begins with Guantanamo Bay detention camp in Cuba, and then Hiroko and Conrad are in Nagasaki in Japan. Of course, there is constant talk about Germany during the Second World War, and then Hiroko travels to colonial India, British Raj, not Indian Raj, sorry, British Raj, colonial India. Then they are forced, actually manipulated by the Burtons to, after they get married, they are manipulated to go to Istanbul in Turkey for their, supposedly for their honeymoon, because things were really bad in India during partition. And while they are in Istanbul, Hiroko's husband Sajjad comes to know from the consulate of India there that they cannot come back to old Delhi, or I mean to Delhi anymore, because they chose to leave India at that time. So now the only option they had was to go to Pakistan. So they moved to Karachi, and then they lived there for a very long time. And towards the end of the novel, we see that Hiroko is in New York, sitting with Mrs. Burton and her daughter-in-law, sorry, her granddaughter, and they are talking about all these events, and the only thing, the only conclusion they come up with is so much hatred, so much hatred, so much hatred. So despite having so many identities of this country and that country and displacements and so many migrations, at the end what we see is a kind of abstract identity. It's so hard to fit any of these characters into one compartment and to say, okay, this person is this person is Indian, this person is American. Nobody is any one identity, and they refuse to kind of fit into any of those compartments. So that way it's quite paradoxical and quite interesting also, that despite having so many identities, at the end what we have is just one abstract identity of being a human, and an unhappy human, because there is so much violence in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. I think that was a very invigorating talk about the identity and culture. And now you did finish on time as promised. So we have, I think we're ready for questions. And also I would now invite Professor Miriam Cook, to carry or lead the discussion.
Professor, you are muted. Professor, you are muted.
Ma'am, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Fatima. That was a really dense, interesting theoretical take on a novel. And I'm so sorry that I haven't read it, because I was expecting you to talk about home fire. So can I just ask you something quickly? Was your dissertation on all of Shamsie's work, or on the novel that you have just discussed?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part.
Okay. I wanted to know whether your work has been on all of Shamsie's work or just on this novel.
Just on this novel, because I think this one fits this critical framework in the best possible manner. But of course, I have engaged with other works as well, like not home fire, but cartography. But that is more grounded in Muhajir and Sindhi identity. There isn't much abstractness which I want to talk about. So because of its wider scope and not just ethnic identity, I wanted to choose this particular novel. Yeah, so basically I work around this one and gradually move on to others, like cartography or salt and saffron, Hazara identity, Muhajir identity, Sindhi identities, etc., etc.
Okay, so then I will be asking you more about what you have talked about here, because I see this connecting to Home Fire, of course, her best known novel. But would you say that what she is doing, what Kamila Shamsie is doing, is to reject the possibility of cosmopolitanism? In other words, people cannot accept the other. That inclusion is impossible, from what you have been saying. And that the demand for assimilation, however hard one tries, the more impossible it becomes. I think of Albert Memmi's very famous sort of semi-autobiography, Pillar of Salt, in which he talks about the French demand that the Tunisian during colonialism assimilate to Frenchness. But then what he shows is the struggle to speak with a perfect accent, to know Molière and whoever, Baudelaire, better than his French teacher from France. But the better he becomes, the more he recognizes that this is impossible. So the impossibility of assimilation. So my first question here, I'm asking about 3 forms of rejection that I heard from your talk. One is from Kamila Shamsie's point of view. One is cosmopolitanism, Islamicate or not. The impossibility of receiving hospitality. And there, I would, I don't know if you've actually read Derrida's work on hospitality. You have. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. So, impossibility of cosmopolitanism, impossibility of hospitality, and impossibility of home. So we have a very, very dystopian situation. And of course, this is what Home Fire also is about, is a radical dystopia. So interestingly, of course, taken from the Antigone story and Antigone's desire to, not just desire, but existential need to bury her brother. So we have Antigone needing to bury Polynices in the same way that Anika must bury Parvez in England. And of course, all of those problems. So at the end, you talk about abstract identity. And while I like the term, I'm not sure that it quite works for me, because we can have multiple identities, and we can be aware of ourselves as having these multiple identities. I've often written about the fact that we have no separate identity. We have an identity that is forced upon us, that we are compelled to accept because of where we are and with whom we're speaking. So you and I would have a different discussion if you and I were in a room together with nobody else. We would have a different discussion if you knew that my husband, Bruce Lawrence, was sitting right next to me. So, you know, this notion of identity has always been fluid, but the awareness of this fluidity, of the awareness of the impossibility of having a fixed identity, is something that we're only beginning to understand. Because, you know, well, I'm American. Well, Miriam Cook, was brought up totally outside America in all sorts of different cultures. And yet I say I'm American, but I only say I'm American under certain circumstances. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. So first of all, if you could respond a bit to these 3 rejections that I've talked about, and then let's see if I can understand abstract identity a little better. But thank you. Very provocative. I really enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind comments and also for those really thought-provoking questions. I will do my best to respond to these. So I'll start with Shamsie's position when she talks about multiple identities or assimilation. So when we talk about assimilation, assimilation is never an innocent process. I mean, who wants to assimilate who? There is always a power dynamics involved in assimilation, power hierarchy, like who is on top of who and who wants to assimilate who. So in the novel, let's say in colonial India, the British decides that Muslims can only have Muslim representation and Hindus should have Hindu representation, and they cannot live together in harmony. And hence they were able to create that divide between these two communities by inculcating in them the sense of this impossibility. But of course, it's not true. So now I will bring in here what Derrida talks about hospitality. So we can have we can have acceptance, not assimilation, but acceptance of the other, whether it's Hindu versus Muslim or this versus that, anyone, any kind of a binary opposition. So we can replace, if we can replace assimilation with acceptance, and kind of, if we can think of what Derrida talks about friendship, like I offer you my hand of friendship while respecting your existence on your terms, and while also claiming my own place and my own existence. So, I mean, it's not as simple as it sounds, of course, it's very complicated, but that is one of the takeaways from what Derrida wants to say. So it's the idea of friendship, not assimilation. So when I become friends with someone, I don't expect that person to assimilate into my values. That person can be a Hindu or a Pakistani or an Afghani or an American, anything or anyone he wants, or he or she wants to be. But the moment I talk about assimilation, I want to homogenize that person's identity. I want that person to become like me. Okay, so if you stay in my house or in my country, you have to act like a Hindu or a Muslim or a Sunni Muslim or a Shia Muslim. So it goes on it goes on and on. So yeah, so first part, I would say that first and second part. And yes, rejection of cosmopolitanism, because it is our inability to extend both this hospitality as well as this friendship, this very insidious idea of homogenization, where we want a certain country to be a Muslim country or a Hindu country, majoritarian politics, basically to say. That is the root cause of all this hatred or the violence or imposed identity. Yeah, so yeah, I would say that even in cartography, when she talks about, let's say, Muhajir identity, she's not very happy with this label of Muhajir identity, even though they are in power. Despite being in power, she says that it kind of reduces her into a foreigner, like, I do not belong to this place. So how about extending a hand of friendship and just let's just say that, fine, I have a separate identity, you have a separate identity, but we can still coexist together in harmony because we respect those differences. I don't know if I made myself clear, but that's what I have to say.
Yeah, so let me just make a brief comment and then let's open it up to questions. You started off with post-identity, right? You talk about post-identity. So I guess in a way, we're between abstract identity, multiple identities, and post-identity. So I don't know if you want to just think about this, or do you want to comment on it?
Okay, so of course she talks about multiple identities. It's like that, one fixed identity, and then she talks about the fluidity of identity, which is a very common thing. All identities are fluid one way or other. But then at the end, of course, she says that because she's using a Japanese protagonist here, had it been an Indian or Pakistani, things might have been very different. But by placing a Japanese woman there, she says that the whole idea of the whole politics of identity, the whole identity politics, can actually be very abstract, as much as it can be tangible. So yeah, so this paradox of having a tangible identity, which can anytime become an abstract idea, this conflict is what she's trying to deal in this novel, Burnt Shadows.
Yeah, so that's interesting because since we are now living in a world of migration, never before have there been so many people homeless. And, within a month, we have 10 million Ukrainians who are homeless. So I wonder, and this is just a comment, you don't have to respond, but I'm wondering if maybe there is in Kamila Shamsie's work in some ways a model that we can drag out of the dystopia to say, well, maybe this is a way we have to start to think about ourselves. We don't think about ourselves as having the identity of the place where we were born or of our parents or of our language, but maybe it's a move to something that is less painful.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to make one comment about Derrida. Actually, yeah, the friendship is really important, but I think also what might be helpful for you is his article on hospitality. So I don't know if so basically what he's doing there is he's using the word for guest and host in French, which is the same, hôte, H-O-T-E. And he's saying that the problem is when the guest starts to become hostile. So we're lots of play on this same word. So the host, the guest, the hostile, and how does one hold on to the binary of the host and the guest? Because the minute that the guest starts to trespass on that line, which is not a barzakh, it is an absolute line. At that point, the relationship is broken into hospitality. So it might be useful to look at. But thank you. So I think, Amina, we can now turn to the questions.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for your comments and for really complicating the discussion. And thank you, Fatima. This was definitely a very engaging discussion on identity. We have the whole series have been planned, and in our last discussion, we were discussing Tahmima Anam's poetry, novels and poetry of Chandrika. And today we are discussing Kamila Shamsie. So I have a question. I just want to extend the discussion. Fatima, you began talking about, imposed identity, shifting identities, multiple identities. The protagonist, Hiroka Tanaka, travels from Japan to India, India to Turkey to Pakistan, from Pakistan to America. So we have this whole, mapping, the whole geographical, mapping of identity. And also you ended your discussion by concluding that the identity is like we were discussing the abstract identity. So I'm curious to know, for example, Baba, when we talk about multiplicity of identities in the location of culture, Baba talked about the term liminality. So that is also the position of power, which is in contrast with acceptance. In fact, it's a position of resistance and protesting against those absolute identities. So it gives power rather than just accepting in how things are. So can we see that also coming out in Kamila Shamsie's work? Instead of, looking it at as an abstract identity, can we look at it as an identity which is a contested identity, which is, is actually, contradicting the concept of pure, as we were talking about the fluid, identity, that identities are essentially fluid, and the essentialization of identities. So I think, that is also an area where we can look into if we apply Baba's, post-colonial theory into the novel. So that will give us, I guess, wider perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, of course, this whole idea of contested identity is, of course, at the crux of this abstract identity she's talking about, that how everything can be contested at any given point. She's kind of tracing the history of this contested space, where you can move on from one identity to another identity without having any control on these events. Okay, but yes, I want to add one more thing, that when we talk about cosmopolitanism, let's think of someone like Salman Rushdie. There is also a sense of privilege. Not everyone can migrate to different spaces, or two or more different spaces on their own. Like, there has to be a kind of privilege which will allow them to migrate to one space to another space without losing their much of their original identity, or whatever they thought their original identity is. So there is an image when Rushdie talks about imaginary homeland, for example. So in that essay, he uses a really beautiful image of when a mirror falls, it breaks into many pieces, but in each piece you can see yourself. Even if it cannot become one whole together, you can actually have multiple identities. You can feel that you are whole also, but at the same time you don't have that whole or holistic idea of who you are. So it's not always helplessness that identities are imposed on us, but sometimes it's also a matter of privilege. So of course, this contested area, this gray area is always there, and Shamsie is actually quite critical of this. I mean, that people do not acknowledge this gray area and rather tend to homogenize the white or black space. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Fatima. We have question now from Matiso Bashingwa. I think he's ready to ask a question. Matiso, please, you can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you hear me, everyone?
Yes, I do hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to appreciate the presentation which has been provided by Fatima. It's a good presentation whose theme is more interesting, as we said last week. I would like to ask simple question about identity and the cosmopolitanism. So before I go to the point, I would like to mention something. I have read the book that's written by Professor Yuval Noah Harari. The first book is Homo Sapiens, Brief History of Humankind. And the second book is Homo Deus, The Brief History of Tomorrow. So insisting to the second book, Homo Deus, which he wants to say that with this period in which we are living, people want to behave like a god by creating other assets which permit us to be more than cultural identities as we are. So there he talked about something which is more important about dataism, it means data. So people, because of technology and other things that we are living now, so data is more important because technology provides a lot of kind of information, and those information guide us in other way of world, which will change maybe our kind of identity. So from that perspective, my question is, do you think that the coming of high technology could induct us to the way of changing our identity, as you said, multiple identity?
Okay, thank you. That's that's very important. And I think a lot of discussions are happening in the areas of digital humanities, where of course I'm sure they talk about identities, our identities being affected by technology, digital world, and all those sort of things. So I don't know, but I'm thinking about one particular discussion, and I think I will elaborate on that. That in coming times, human beings might also come to have romantic relationships with robots. I mean, one
Sure.
interpretation could be that people will be so dependent on machines, technology, all these advancements, that they might even come to a point where they might even fall in love with robots, with machines, basically. So of course, and I mean, it might not be pertinent, but the whole idea of having a market of companionship, having machines, toys, sex toys, I think the premise of all this is basically this, that we will somehow move on from this identity also, the one we have. I mean, we all have several identities, but even the it will be more transformative or more radical or more subversive, that the extent to which we will come to rely on machines or technology. So that's one point to think about all the changes, all the transformations we can have in coming times, and because of technology.
Good.
Yeah, so I hope, yeah.
Yeah, so in addition, I'm sorry for this. I would like to also to add something about that. Let's take that example that you have drawn. You say that humanity depends or rely on technology. So in that book, Yuval Noah Harari also tried to emphasize on it when he says that because human beings depend mostly on technology, we become what we call algorithm. So the fact of being algorithm, because we consume some data from different persons and from different kind of areas. So this situation conduct us in the way of forgetting our own religion. To mean technology, it becomes like a way of another religion. And as you have mentioned in your presentation, religion also is a kind of identity, religious identity. So do you think that, because in the book, Yuval Noah Harari said that this religion is like Silicon Valley in America, United States of America, I think. So do you think that this fact of depending on technology and make us to forget our own religion that we know, and that we depend on technology, can be the fact which can conduct or can make the world to be more cosmopolitan, as you know?
I would say that I cannot say that this dependence on technology or technological advancement can erase religions from the face of earth. No, because religions have been there for a very long time, and despite all these advancements, we still see the presence of religion. More than that, we see religious conflicts more than any other time. So rather than saying that the existing religions will be erased and one religion of, let's say, technology or machines or anything of that sort will come and replace the existing religions, no. But the possibility of conflict, yes. If not adaptability, then resistance or conflict, that is always there. So I would say that it's conflict is the word here. I mean, there will be conflicts, there will be adaptability too, but more than that, there will be conflicts, there will be resistance. But it will be wrong to say that the existing religions will be erased. Yeah, that's all I can say at the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your responses.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mati. So I think we will just, because of the paucity of time, we will have one last question from Nahid Aslam. So you can ask your question now.
Hello. Sorry, I came in very late, but I just wanted to make a point on what Mateso has said. I've also read Harari's stuff, and when we talk about humans, we have to bear in mind which humans we're talking about. These people in the future that will become algorithms, or that will be dependent on technology. They're not going to be the 8 billion people that are on this planet just now. They're going to be a very elite group. We, the common people, I don't know if we have a future. The future for humanity will be those that have managed to stay ahead and adapted to the technology and have the money to adapt, and are living in places that are relatively safe. Now, the world is in crisis. Much of the world is in crisis, but there are pockets of the world where there is peace and harmony, and people can progress, educate themselves, and live a very comfortable life. And so, Mateso, I think, I think we need to really look at what Harari is saying and say, when we talk about humanity, who is the humanity? Is it going to be the people in Africa and Asia? I really don't think so. And when we talk about religion, we are social beings, and Harari talks a lot about this. We function best in small groups. Now, we talk about cosmopolitan societies, but those cosmopolitan societies are still very disparate, very dysfunctional. People may be pushed into living together with those of a different ethnic background or religious background. But how many people do we actually associate with? Very few. And as the family becomes more and more dysfunctional in the West, I'm not sure what will happen. But and the Western model is a model that the rest of the world seems to be wanting to follow at this particular time. So I don't hold very much hope for common humanity, but maybe for the elite humanity, there's a different thing going on. So sorry, that's not a question, but just a statement. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I will just add to that I will just add one thing to that. You said elite, you mentioned something about the elite. So because people are now traveling to different planets also. So I was thinking of one possibility in the future. Maybe rich and poor people can have different planets to live on. I mean, I don't know, but
no, you know what? Planet Earth will be trashed. We won't be able to live life on this planet because we're going to destroy it.
Mm-hmm. It could be one possibility of having a different planet where they can have better living conditions. And by better living conditions, I don't mean sorry, something happened to my video. I don't mean just technology, but also food, climate change, and climate change, of course, is one of the factors that would determine how long we can sustain ourselves. But yes, we should definitely think along these lines. That's okay, Nahi, don't be sorry. We are just discussing things here. Yeah, so I think no more questions.
All right, I think we have timed it perfectly. So with such dismal thoughts on humanity, I want to ask Professor Mariam Cook and Professor Bruce if they have any concluding remarks before we end this presentation.
I want to thank everyone again for including us, and I want to wish everyone Ramadan Kareem.
Thank you.
I too. I'm very, very happy to be part of this and looking forward to tomorrow, as well as thankful for today.
Ramadan.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your kind comments.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone. Thank you for joining in. This has been a very invigorating, very absorbing discussion. Any discussion on identity is never going to be straightforward. But within this pall of gloom, I hope we pray for peace, prosperity, and happiness, good health for all of us on this planet. We hope we are able to restore this planet and, and stay on Earth, with sustainable approach, which the Umran Green also envisions. So thank you everyone for joining us, and happy Ramadan Kareem to everyone. Thank you so much. Rajiv, if you want to add something.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful. I just wanted to say that that is what we all are doing with the idea of Barzakh logic. That it allows us to communicate and to think about a new possibility of humanity, especially when we talk about the collective effort. That we need to recognize that we are not standing alone, but it's all our collective efforts. And we are in an age that we can recognize it. We have achieved that intellect. We have achieved that wisdom to rethink, to revise our mind, to revise our idea, to revise our identity even. So with this idea, we have been working with Umran, and we are very thankful that Professor Bruce have been our mentor for this whole project. So we'll see you again tomorrow for the discussion. We will be continuing. See you again.
Yes.
Happy Ramadan. Namaste.
Happy Ramadan.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone. Thanks to everyone who joined me here, who joined us here today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you
Happy
very
Ramadan
much.
to
Thank you
all.
very much,
Truly
Amina. Thank
an
you.
enriching session.
Thank you. I see some more familiar faces. Mahi, Sharoni, yes.
So we will see again tomorrow,
Yeah,
Mahi
tomorrow.
and Saroni, and we'll have more
Yeah,
discussion tomorrow.
looking forward to Sharoni's
Thank
talk
you very much,
tomorrow.
Amina. It was wonderful.
Thank you. My
Thank you very
pleasure.
much.
Thoroughly
Thank you very
enjoyed.
much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Fatima. Loved
Yeah,
your
thanks.
presentation. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you, Matesu.
Bye.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Rajesh.
Thank you, Dr. Dey. Thank you very much for joining.